I saw my wife offering her boss her hair to stroke at the company couple's dinner, so I walked over to them, touched her shoulder, and simply said, "Enjoy the night, it's your last with a ring." I left without looking back, taking with me the last bit of dignity I had left. She tried to explain later, but silence was my answer. Over time, I discovered a new love with a calm gaze and a faithful embrace, someone who taught me that respect can't be begged for. She, on the other hand, soon realized that her boss never intended to stay, it was just vanity. Alone, she tried to look for me with regret in her eyes. I listened to her, calmly, and offered the forgiveness that freed me. But I made it clear, I forgave so that the pain wouldn't hold me back, not so we could start over. Each of us went our separate ways, she with the guilt, I with peace. It was at that precise moment, before that table lit by expensive candles and forced smiles, that I realized how dead a marriage can be even when the bodies still feign warmth. The entire room was laughing at something the boss had said, something banal, probably, and my wife, sitting next to him, leaned in slightly, laughing as if the world were a stage and she the leading actress in a poorly rehearsed scene. When he touched her hair and she allowed it, arching her neck as if offering an intimate secret, I didn't just see a gesture. I saw everything. I saw the days she'd arrived late, the hidden messages, the new perfume, the poorly worded apologies. I saw time passing before my eyes as if my memory had pressed a replay button, and every image that had previously seemed like paranoia now gained cruel clarity. It wasn't just vanity, it wasn't just a joke. It was a choice. And she had chosen. So I went to them. I touched her shoulder with the lightness of someone touching for the last time. I said it, that sentence that felt like it had been written days before on my chest, waiting for the right moment to bleed out. There was no scream. There was no drama. Just that sentence. And the silence that followed was louder than any fight we could have had. She tried to speak. She followed, her eyes empty and her voice trembling. But I didn't want excuses. I didn't want promises that it was a mistake, that it meant nothing. I wanted my silence back. I wanted my peace. And, most of all, I wanted the dignity I had left, before she was gone too. I left. I left without bags, without goodbyes, without warning. I just left. I sat in the car seat like someone fleeing a fire and took my first breath in months. And in that breath came everything, anger, relief, sadness, fear. But also a certainty, I didn't deserve this. The days that followed were a bottomless pit. Waking up without her. Sleeping without the sound of the shower. Eating while staring at a plate that once held two lovingly divided halves of rice. The details are what hurt the most. The details and the emptiness they leave behind when they're gone. And I confess, even though I was the one who left, even though she was the one who made a mistake, I still stared at my phone, waiting for something. Not her request back. But something that would make me understand. Something that would justify a betrayal that destroys an entire story. Something that would make sense of the broken promise made face to face. And yes, she tried. She texted. She called. She asked to talk. She said she was confused. That the boss was just a distraction. That I was her true love. That she regretted it the moment she saw me leaving. That it was all just a moment, a slip, a lapse in vanity. But the truth is, regret only exists when the consequences hurt more than the pleasure. And she didn't regret the touch. She regretted my silence. The absence of my voice. The lack of my laughter in the living room. The empty bed. The plate made for just one. The smell that never returned. Meanwhile, I was being reborn. Slowly. Painfully. But I was being reborn. I discovered that there is love in the calm, and that a hug can heal wounds that years of promises never healed. I discovered someone who listened to me with their eyes, who laughed at my bad jokes, who cared about how my day was. I discovered that true love doesn't need to beg for respect. And that's when everything changed. Because while she sank into regret, I rose, not out of revenge, but out of deservedness. And when she reappeared, her face weary and her eyes filled with a past that no longer belonged to me, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Because here was someone who traded a home for a game. Who traded a story for a scene of vanity. Who chose the fantasy of the moment over the truth of affection. She said she still loved me. That she'd never forgotten me. That she thought of me every day. And I believed her. Because I know it was true. But love doesn't survive alone. It can't withstand betrayal. It doesn't flourish in the land of pride. And I said, calmly, I forgive you. But not to start over. I forgive to free myself. And in that moment, she understood. She understood that she'd lost something that wouldn't come back. That some people, when they leave no room for return. That certain mistakes cost more than the heart can bear. Time passed. And she, alone, watched from afar as I rebuilt my life. She saw photos of me with someone who treated her with the same affection she once had. She saw the girl who held my hand with trust, sweetness, loyalty. She saw it was too late. And she felt, for the first real time, the weight of having destroyed something so many spend their lives searching for. And it's not about revenge. It never was. It's about the peace that comes when we choose not to go back. But what she doesn't know yet, is that the new woman by my side doesn't just love me. She cares for the daughter my ex never wanted. She loves a child who never came from her womb, but who carries my blood. A girl who today calls me father, but who she once said she wasn't ready to welcome. And now, watching from afar, she cries not only for the man she lost, but for the family she failed to build. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real punishment. Not my absence. But seeing the love she rejected blossom in the arms of another. And that, is the true story of how everything is lost for a touch of the hair. But what happened the day she tried to come back? What did I do, when she reappeared asking for a second chance? Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize or justify any kind of betrayal. All the stories are fictional, but they carry profound truths about the real consequences of bad choices. Our purpose is clear, to show how betrayal corrodes love, destroys homes, and leaves scars that time cannot erase. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is more than a story. It's a reality check. Happy listening. Daniel was always a man of silences that said more than words. Not because he didn't know how to express himself, but because he carried within him a rare sensitivity, the kind that doesn't impose itself, but makes itself felt in small gestures, like adjusting someone's coat on a cold day, remembering the name of a loved one's favorite book, or making coffee exactly how they like it, even on busy days. He was a man of discreet but constant presence. One of those who arrives slowly but remains firmly. He never needed grand speeches to be noticed. His strength came from consistency, respect, and the almost instinctive way he protected what he loved. Emily, on the other hand, was a storm. Charismatic, outgoing, passionate about everything intense. She had an easy laugh, eyes that sparkled in overly lit rooms, and a presence that never went unnoticed. The kind of woman who walked into a room and changed the air. Intelligent, ambitious, and with a restlessness that sometimes bordered on excessive, she was the exact opposite of Daniel, and, for that very reason, the fit between them seemed magical. When they met, she spoke enthusiastically about everything, books, travels, goals, pains. And he listened with such complete attention that Emily, for the first time in her life, felt truly listened to. Perhaps that was what won her over. Their relationship blossomed quickly but grew slowly. They built their life together with an almost artisanal zeal. Their first apartment was small, with thin walls and second-hand furniture, but they decorated it like a palace. The old sofa became special when they curled up on it to watch bad movies just for an extra reason to laugh together. The room barely had room for the bed, but she always slept on her left side, with her head on his chest, and he said it was the only place in the world where life made sense. They argued sometimes, like all couples, but never went to sleep angry. There was something pure in the way they loved each other, a mutual respect that seemed unbreakable, as if the world outside could crumble, yet within that bond, there would be shelter. Daniel never spared any effort to make her feel safe. Even in the most challenging moments, like when she decided to go back to school and had to stay up all night, he took on the household routine without complaint. He said that investing in her was investing in them. When she graduated, he was in the front row, with a smile that seemed to light up the auditorium. He gave a standing ovation, his eyes welling with tears, as she gave her proud speech. And that day, seeing him there, she thought she could never love another man as she loved that one. And maybe it was true in that moment. Maybe it was. Over time, Emily began to grow professionally. Her ambition, always there, now gained ground, a name, and opportunities. She was sought after, admired, and seen. She began to be noticed by people in circles Daniel had never before trod. He, in turn, pursued his stable, discreet, and quiet career, as he had always preferred. There was no jealousy in it. There was admiration. He was proud to see her blossoming, even if her spring didn't coincide with his. But as she shone more brightly outside the home, something silent began to shift within the walls of the home they had built together. Invitations to events, dinners, and short business trips came. At first, she recounted everything in detail, her eyes full of enthusiasm. Daniel listened attentively, as always. But gradually, her stories became shorter, the details more vague. When he asked how dinner was, she would reply with, "It was great," and quickly change the subject. He noticed, but didn't press. He thought it was fatigue. That maybe she was just exhausted from the hectic routine. Maybe it was just a phase. And phases, he believed, passed. Their routine began to subtly change. Small absences that were once exceptions became frequent. Dinners were cancelled. Messages were answered late. Sundays, once sacred, became negotiable. He still made her coffee the way she liked it, but he no longer knew if she would drink it at home. He began to wonder, silently, if they were still walking side by side or just heading in the same direction out of inertia. There was still affection, there were still gestures of care, but something invisible seemed to have settled between them, something that didn't scream, but also wouldn't leave them alone. Emily, for her part, seemed to live in two worlds. One where she was admired, respected, desired. And another where she was remembered for who she was, where she began, for who she truly was. Daniel represented her roots, her history, her humanity. But perhaps without realizing it, she began to be enchanted by how she was seen from the outside. As if the external reflection gained more power than the inner mirror. It wasn't malice. It wasn't coldness. It was vanity. It was neediness. It was an ego inflated by praise she didn't know she still needed. And in this game of glances and recognition, her essence slowly distanced itself from the very thing it once promised to protect. Daniel felt. He didn't know exactly what, but he felt it. Like someone who notices the scent of home has changed, but can't quite pinpoint what's been taken away or added. He felt less seen. Less heard. He still loved, but he no longer knew if he was loved with the same depth. His eyes searched her gestures for an answer that words couldn't provide. And yet, he remained. Because he still believed. Because he still remembered the days when everything was light, simple, and sincere. Because he had faith that their love was strong enough to weather any storm. Their closest friends noticed the distance. One of them, more bluntly, even commented during a barbecue, "She's acting different, isn't she?" Daniel, as always, avoided the subject. He preferred not to entertain suspicions. He preferred to think it was a phase. That they would soon return to laughing loudly on the couch, fighting over the dishes, and reconciling with long kisses. That she would soon return to laying her head on his chest, telling him that this was the only place in the world where life made sense. He preferred to remember the birthdays when she prepared surprises by hiding notes around the house, the times she cried watching bad movies, and the afternoons when they made plans to grow old together. But even the sweetest memories can turn bitter when they don't find an echo in the present. Even with the changes, Daniel remained loyal. Not just in the obvious sense of fidelity, but loyal to the feeling, the commitment, the choice he had made. He loved with the same intensity, even in silence. Even when it hurt. He still believed in what they had built. He still saw in her the woman who made him smile just by walking into the room. He still saw in himself the man who promised to care for her, even on the days she forgot to take care of herself. It wasn't stupidity. It wasn't submission. It was love in its purest form, the kind that persists before giving up. And it was in this silent tension, in this setting where love still existed but was beginning to struggle against invisible cracks, that the days passed. A delicate dance between what was and what hangs by a thread. A story that, on the outside, still seemed intact, but on the inside, was already beginning to show the first signs of an emotional collapse that not even the protagonists were ready to see. The night of the dinner approached. One of those formal events Emily had insisted Daniel attend. She said it was important to her. That he needed to meet the people with whom she was growing professionally. And he, as always, accepted. He chose his best shirt. He shaved carefully. He wanted to be up to the task. Not out of vanity, but out of love. Little did he know that this would be the beginning of the end. That the next few hours would extract from him much more than a forced smile or polite conversation. That there, amidst yellow lights, clinking glasses, and fake laughter, he would meet a new version of the woman who once swore never to hurt him. And she didn't know it yet. She didn't yet imagine that what would happen that night would not only change the course of their marriage, but would forever change the meaning of what it means to lose someone who loved you completely. That night, the restaurant seemed to have been set up exclusively to stage a cruel play. The dim lights, the sound of the piano in the background, the glasses clinking in forced toasts, everything conspired to give an elegant tone to what, inside, was already a silent tragedy in progress. Daniel walked beside Emily with a restrained serenity, as if rehearsing the role of a proud husband. She, in turn, wore a burgundy dress that seemed hand-picked to make an impression. She chatted with her colleagues with the confidence of someone who knew she was being watched, admired, respected. And he watched her silently, trying to find in her some trace of the woman with whom he had shared so many slow Sundays, so many shared coffees, so many understood silences. But what he saw was a polished, public version, carefully constructed to please an audience he didn't even know. When they reached the reserved table, the seats were already marked with delicate place cards. She sat next to the man he quickly realized was the boss she'd mentioned so often in passing over the past few months. Conversation flowed between them with an uncomfortable familiarity. Intimate laughter, subtle touches on the arm, glances that lingered longer than necessary. Daniel remained silent, listening, observing, trying to convince himself it was overkill, that his mind was drawing lines between dots that shouldn't connect. But then he saw it. It wasn't the touch itself, it was the permission. The way she tilted her face when the other man, with the ease of someone who'd done it before, slid his fingers through her hair. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't casual, it wasn't professional. It was intimate. And what hurt most wasn't the gesture, but the lack of reaction. The comfort. The acceptance. Daniel stood up, walked toward her calmly, touched her shoulder with the same gentleness with which one bids farewell to someone who has already departed, and said with serene firmness, "Enjoy the night, it's your last with a ring." He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't want to. He left without looking back, without the need to confirm what was already obvious. The pain was burning, but dignity kept him standing. Outside, the night air seemed lighter than the suffocating atmosphere he had left behind. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. Wounded, yes. But free. She tried to chase him. She called his name, asked to talk, but he got into the car without even turning his head. Silence was now the language he spoke best. In the following days, the messages began to arrive. First timid, then desperate. Missed calls, long texts, voiceovers with a choked voice. "It was a mistake," said one. "It meant nothing," said another. "You are the love of my life," she tried with the third. But he didn't answer. Silence was her protection, her armor. Every time she heard her phone ring, her heart sank, but her fingers didn't move. She didn't want explanations. She wanted distance. She wanted to find herself far from the shadow of the one who had undone her. Time passed. Months. She disappeared for a while. He moved on. He met someone with soft eyes and a strong soul. Someone who didn't need a stage to shine. Little by little, he rebuilt himself. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but it was transformed. Into strength. Into clarity. Into learning. One day, while walking hand in hand with his new companion through a park, he heard a child's laughter and looked back. It was a little girl running toward a swing, followed by a woman guiding her lovingly. And there, in that moment of lightness, he felt he had truly begun anew. Months later, the doorbell rang. He opened the door, and there she was. Different. Thinner. Tired. Her eyes were red, but not from recent crying, from sleepless nights, from accumulated weight. She asked for just 5 minutes. He hesitated, but then allowed it. They sat in the living room that had once been the scene of so many good times. She looked around as if trying to find traces of herself in a place that no longer belonged to her. He waited in silence. She began to speak. Her voice low, almost a whisper. She said she'd walked away to understand what she'd done. That she'd spent nights trying to justify to herself an action that made no sense. She said that, deep down, she'd never imagined he'd actually leave. That she thought it would just be another argument, that the next day he'd be there, making coffee as usual. But when she saw him leave, she realized she'd crossed a line of no return. She confessed that she'd reached out to her boss, thinking there might be some possibility, some genuine feeling, but that she soon realized he didn't see her as someone to build a life with, but merely as a fleeting reflection of his own ego. Daniel remained silent. Listening wasn't easy, but it was part of the process. She continued. He said he'd lost friends. That she'd started seeing herself differently. That his own family had drifted away. But nothing hurt more than watching him move on. She said she'd watched him from afar. That she'd seen him when he appeared in a photo next to a woman and a child. And that it had destroyed her. She wanted to know. She needed to know. "Is she your daughter?" he asked, his voice breaking. He stared at her for a long, tense moment. Then he took a deep breath and replied calmly. "No. But it feels like it." She didn't understand. Then he explained. He told her that the woman he was with now was the mother of a little girl who had been abandoned as a baby by her father. He said that, during their first encounters, the child hid behind her mother, frightened, but over time, she began to smile, to look at him with her eyes, to call him friend, then Dan, and finally, Dad. He said that that girl brought back a kind of love he thought he had lost forever. Not romantic love. But the love that builds homes, that heals, that restores. And it was there, as he spoke with a sparkle in his eyes and a serenity in his voice, that she understood. She understood that she had lost something that would never return. That the man who once slept beside her now belonged to another world, to another kind of life, to a kind of love that allows no return. She tried to hold his hand. She wept silently. She said she still loved him. That she thought about him every day. That she would give anything to turn back time. But he just smiled sadly. He said he forgave her. That he cherished the good memories. That their story deserved respect, despite the end. But there was no more room. Forgiving isn't starting over, he said. It's no longer carrying the weight of what isn't mine. And then she asked, as if still searching for a ray of hope, do you still feel anything for me? He hesitated. Then he answered, I do. The way you feel for someone who was home and turned away. Someone who taught me how I no longer want to be loved. She cried. But she didn't beg. She knew it was too late. She got up slowly. She looked at him one last time and left. On the street, the icy wind bit her face, but the pain she felt inside was colder. For the first time, she understood what it was like to lose someone completely. Not to another person, but to a life that no longer included her. And there, walking alone among the city lights, she realized that her greatest punishment wasn't regret, nor the judgment of others. It was seeing, with her own eyes, the home she herself destroyed blossoming in the hands of another woman. With another child. With another future. And that, perhaps, was the greatest loss. Not the love she betrayed. But the family she could have built, and which now, forever, would live, without her. Life went on, as it always does, dragging what remains of the crumbling days and pushing, gently or violently, those who dare to continue. After that last conversation, she never returned. No messages, no connections, no notes left in mailboxes as before. The silence, which had once been punishment, was now acceptance. A silent acknowledgement that everything that could still be said would no longer be of value. She understood. Too late, but you understood. And, understanding, you retreated. He carried the regret in his chest like an open wound that no one could see, but that weighed with every step. There were no more confrontations. Only absence. An absence that became part of his life like the end of a song that, though beautiful, could no longer be played. He, on the other hand, moved on with his life like someone crossing a raging river and finally finding the shore. The pain dissolved over time, replaced by a more powerful feeling, peace. A kind of peace that comes not from revenge, but from liberation. The woman he shared his days with was now his refuge, not his battlefield. She didn't demand daily proof of love. She offered silence when he needed to think and words when he needed to be heard. And the girl, the one who once called him friend with suspicious eyes, now jumped on his lap on Sunday mornings, smiling with crooked teeth and telling him he was her hero. They were forming something new, something that didn't need to resemble anything from the past. A new story, with different colors, different sounds, different frequencies. A story written with steady hands and rebuilt hearts. As for Emily, time wasn't kind to her, but it wasn't cruel either. It was fair. She continued living, but never in the same way. She changed homes, jobs, social circles. She tried to start over in other cities, with different faces, different routines. She had relationships, but none lasted more than a few months. There was always something that reminded her of what she lost. A gesture, a scent, a sound. One morning, she stopped in front of the mirror and stared at herself for minutes that felt like hours. She was no longer the woman who used to shine at elegant dinners. She was different. Someone more sober, more silent, more aware. But also lonely. Not for the lack of company, but for the lack of peace. She began to live in a state of waiting, like someone waiting for the pain of a wrong choice to finally become a guilt-free memory. But it didn't. Guilt, when true, doesn't go away. It only learns to be silent. Years later, an unexpected reunion sealed their fates once and for all. It was in a park, on an ordinary morning, one of those when the sky seems clear only to provoke irony. She was walking distractedly when, from afar, she saw a man pushing a swing. The child screamed with joy, and the woman beside him smiled with a look she knew well. A look that only exists when there is complete trust. She recognized his walk before she saw his face. It was him. She stopped. She observed. For a few seconds, she wanted to go back. To say something. Anything. But she didn't. Because there, in that ordinary scene, she saw something she'd never been able to build with anyone else. She saw love. She saw belonging. She saw everything she'd lost through vanity, pride, or a mistake. And then she understood that the past cannot be rewritten, and that some losses are permanent, not out of malice, but by consequence. She turned, took a deep breath, and kept walking. She didn't cry. There were no more tears. Only the silent weight of reality. The love of her life had moved on, and she was just a distant memory of a time that would never return. He saw her. Briefly. He recognized her walk, her features. But he didn't move. He didn't call out. He didn't feel the need. Because the love that was there, in that moment, was too whole to be mixed with ghosts of the past. What he felt for her now was a kind of mature and distant affection, like someone grateful for everything they'd experienced but would never want to relive. A feeling without hurt, but without space. Without rancor, but without return. That night, as she put her daughter to bed, she asked him to tell her one more story. And he, with the girl lying on his chest, began to invent a tale about a man who traversed a dark forest, fell into holes, and faced storms, but who, in the end, found a field of flowers where he decided to build his home. He told her, sometimes we go through bad places to learn to recognize the good ones. And she, with the purity only a child possesses, replied, I like it here. And he replied, me too. Emily, somewhere far away, read a letter she had written to him years before, but had never had the courage to send. She folded the paper, put it back in the drawer, and, for the first time, accepted that the love she had lost was no longer hers. Not for lack of desire, but because time does not forgive those who waste what is most precious. And when you destroy a true home, there is no castle that can replace it. Now that this story has come to an end, I want to hear from you. What did you think? Comment below and tell me your honest opinion. Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever known someone who destroyed a true love for a moment of vanity? And most importantly, how did this story make you feel? If you enjoyed this, subscribe to the channel to hear more stories as impactful as this one. Every week we have new narratives that show how our choices can define the course of our lives. And remember, betrayal isn't entertainment. It's real pain. It's destruction. Here, we don't support any kind of betrayal. The goal of this channel is to show, through fiction, the devastating consequences of choices that hurt those we love. May it serve as reflection. May it serve as a warning. May it serve as healing for those who have been through it. Betrayal isn't a mistake. It's a decision. And every decision has a price. May true love, when found, never be wasted. Because sometimes it doesn't return. And when it doesn't, it blooms elsewhere. Far from those who didn't know how to care for it.